Hello, everybody. I am just more than excited. As I told Jivana, I felt like a kid today to have this conversation going on. So thank you again, Jivana, for being here, for taking your time to share your wisdoms and insights and just presence with us today. Thank you. Mm,
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
mm. Well, before we dive into everything, I'd like you if you could share a short landing or grounding practice for everyone to be even more present for us
Mhm.
today.
Sure, I'd love to.
Thank you. Mm,
Maybe we can start by getting more comfortable. So I'd like to invite people to sit back if they're in a chair and to take a few breaths, and you can have the eyes open or let them close. And one of my favorite ways to ground is to connect the breath with gravity and to think of this connection to gravity as this eternal force, that's holding us to the earth. And so what I explore is how on the exhalations, I can feel my body connecting down into the earth. And then the inhalation is constantly lifting me away. So the exhalation is grounding and connecting downward, and the inhalation lifting away. I just like to explore that experience of exhaling, grounding, inhaling, expanding, exploring how that feels for you right now. And then you can take another breath and slowly coming back
mm,
and opening the eyes if you had them closed. Stretching. I see you're stretching. That's nice. Yeah.
mm, mm, Thank you. I felt so poetic, like the kind of permanent bondage and relationship we have with the earth, but orienting through this gravity, this force that allows us to be here actually was so calming for me. Mm,
Oh, good. Yeah, I like to think about it a lot, especially in asana, actually. I
mm,
love to think about gravity, and sometimes I say it's like Earth's hug. It's like
mm,
holding us tight.
mm.
But it also is such an important force when we're thinking about how we move the body. But anyway, but I'll
Yeah,
let you
well,
ask me questions. Go
yeah,
ahead.
but I like that. I like that. Like do you mean like the kind of density of the body moving away and then closer to the earth? Is that what you envision or?
Yeah, I mean, asana is very much about changing the relationship of the body to gravity
Mm,
and exploring what gravity does, how it presses parts of the body into the earth, right? Or lifts away, and how we have to use strength to lift away. And a lot
mm,
with accessible yoga and adapting practice, it's really important to think about it because one of the things we can do in when we adapt to practice and asana practice is we can change the orientation to gravity, right? We can change it can make a pose more accessible
mm,
or less accessible. Sometimes it makes it more challenging, but you could think about like I don't know, like a standing pose, balancing pose. This challenge, right? Gravity is pulling you down, and you're trying to stand and balance,
mm,
and that can be challenging or impossible for some people. And so you could explore like reclined or laying down balancing poses, and where you're not fighting gravity anymore. So
mm,
then you can explore the shape maybe and think about it differently. Let go of the force of gravity. Or you
mm,
can use gravity to support part of the body, like in a seated forward bend. If you're straining and your back is rounding, you can do a
mm,
reclined one where you lie on the back and you extend the leg up, like Supta Padangusthasana. That's like a very different experience of gravity in a forward bend than like a seated forward bend. So
mm,
it's so important to me to think with our not only in our practice, but just in our human experience on this planet, right? This gravity is constantly aging me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and seeing it with like playfulness and creativity instead of like an enemy and trying to
Yeah, right.
effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so brilliant. Well, that's exactly the kind of insights and ideas that I feel that I miss and that I missed along my the beginning of my career teaching yoga. I think
Mm,
I've been teaching for 4 or 5 years now in between travels, and I just felt shocked to realize I discovered your work through the Connected Yoga Teachers
mm.
podcast. So thank you to Shannon Crow for
Yeah.
sharing the interviews.
Thank you, Shannon. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just felt like a shock. It was like, wow, that hits me so badly in the sense that it was so true. It felt true. And yet I missed the skills and even the
Mm,
openness. I thought, I
mm,
believed I was the more, accessible yoga oriented teacher in my area, because in France we don't talk about that much, sadly, or not yet. And so I felt kind of proud. I was like, yeah, of course, because I add a lot of free movement. My class is so accessible. And then someday, someone came into the class and she was just not feeling comfortable at all, and she felt it was not accessible for her. And I
mm,
felt like a failure in my practice.
mm,
Like, oh, wow, okay, this is not the experience that everybody has. And then what can I do? And maybe the next week or the next day, like, wow, the episode appeared and you appeared in my life. And I was like, oh my God, I have to buy all the books that Jivana wrote. And it just helps me very, very much in my daily practice, but also in my own approach of life, like
mm,
accessibility and kind of deconstructing the myth around asana and body and performances and everything. So yeah, just life changing, really.
yeah.
Mm,
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful. I mean, I
mm,
appreciate it. I think students are the key, actually, learning from students, like you said. So you learned, your student showed you like there's something
mm,
she couldn't do, and then you 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 grew to, you expanded to be able to
mm,
serve her. And I think that's beautiful.
mm,
Beautiful.
Yeah, the humbleness that it requires as well. Like instead of judging, like, okay, that's a fact, but then what do we do about that, and how do we equip ourselves in order to serve more and kind of, well, that's the word better that comes to mind, but I don't know. It's like a little bit of judgment, but to me, that's
Mm,
better because I could feel a lot of anger also,
mm,
and that's something that I was grateful for that you touched on in your book, the Yoga Revolution book. Like anger is part of the human experience, and it can sometimes drive us. So it's not like good vibes only, like spiritual bypass. We only live in lotuses and we, eat flowers and everything's good.
yeah.
No, sometimes just really, really shitty, and we have to do something about that. So,
Yeah. No, and I think you're getting to something important around anger, but also like just the reality of human experience that,
mm,
like, I think often we're trained to just teach to a very, like, a perfect being, like a perfect body that can do all
mm,
these intense shapes and stuff. And my experience is very much different than that. And I just think what I was trying to do was to take what I was learning from my teachers and apply it to the real people that I was serving. And I realized this is not,
mm,
it's not helping. It's not applicable. It doesn't, and so you have to find, um, I don't know, a way to integrate those experiences to me, to respect the people in front of me, to respect them and allow them to teach me.
mm,
I realized I had to be more creative in the way that I was teaching. And that was really important. It's not that I don't, I think it's important to say I love the tradition of yoga, and have great respect for it. I mean, it's such a beautiful ancient tradition that we have, that we're talking thousands and thousands of years of an indigenous spiritual tradition. And I don't think it needs to be changed. But what I think is, I think it has been changed, actually. I think
yeah,
I think the modern yoga is actually a change And so to me, I like to kind of go back as much as I can to some of the sources and say, what were they actually teaching? What were they really
Mm,
trying to say? Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate your honesty as well, like realizing the gap in between the heritage and the way it was taught, and then, oh, but this doesn't work for everybody and everybody's. So how do we combine both while respecting the tradition and the lineages, but also doing yoga really, not just dreaming of something and then judging ourselves for not being that fantasy. And would you
Yeah.
share about that kind of journey? I guess it's your life's journey, but like the transition maybe when you discovered that it wasn't adapted, and then the creative process you really dove into.
Hmm. I mean, before I was teaching, I was an AIDS activist in the 1980s and 1990s, and I was using yoga for my own self-care and my own healing because I had so much loss. So many people around me were sick and dying. I mean, so many people died. It's like, I think for younger people, it's hard to remember, even though I think now we've gone through COVID and people have a sense, but it
Mm,
was like AIDS was in the beginning of AIDS. It was really just gay men like myself that were dying, and huge numbers. I lost so many close friends during that time. It was devastating. And so I was angry and hurt and grieving. And yoga helped me. I had learned yoga from my grandmother when I was a young child. And then I came back to it then when I was struggling. And then I realized that it was so helpful to me. I wanted to share it with my community. And so I decided to teach because I wanted to teach yoga to people with AIDS and
mm,
HIV. That's why I started teaching. So I knew from the beginning that it would have to be adapted to serve them. And I was lucky because I had great teachers and so many people that were already looking at accessibility. I mean, my teacher, Swami Satchidananda, had that in mind, but also I learned, I don't know if you people like you've heard of Nischala Devi and Dean Ornish,
mm,
these people that were really, it was basically the beginning of yoga therapy or of like Western yoga therapy, I'd say, in the 1990s. And I got to work with them and study with them. Yanni Chapman is another one. She created a yoga for cancer program. There were just so many
mm,
incredible teachers that I was exposed to. Sherry Clampett, who does therapeutic yoga. Anyway, so they showed me that you could adapt, and but also they were all going kind of towards yoga therapy,
mm,
and and I have some resistance, even though I love yoga therapy. I'm a yoga therapist, and I love the idea. I think yoga therapy ends up just being like another way that our culture, at least Western culture, kind of makes it less accessible. It makes the practice more exclusive because it's expensive. It's usually one-on-one. It fits into a healthcare system that is already not functioning here in the US, at least.
mm,
So I was curious about finding ways to make it more open rather than
mm,
more specific. You know what I mean?
definitely. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah.
Such a journey. It's like so brave as well to see that, to see the truth, really, even though
Yeah, I
it's
guess
not
I appreciate.
easy.
I
Mm,
do think it's brave, but also I think I can't. I'm a very honest person. I have a hard time not saying what I think. Like get in trouble. I get in
cool.
trouble.
Love that. Mm.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It's
Yeah, it can
dangerous.
be if people are not ready to hear, but well, I'm ready, so go for it.
You're ready.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
ready.
And if I'm not, I can tell you that as well. Like it's too much. But yeah, I really appreciate that honesty, and that also sometimes we do yoga because we can't function without it, or without therapy, or without any kind of resources that we find on the way. And it's not always like this enlightening moments like, oh, I found my path. Well, I
Mm.
felt so shitty, and I had such a deep rock bottom that I couldn't do without it. So just the truth and the reality. So it's not always, pink and, and beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Mm,
it's not. I don't think spiritual practice is what people think it is.
mm,
Yeah, I think it's just about honesty. Actually, what I've been thinking about more and more is that the ethical teachings of yoga, like if you're familiar with Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and
Mm,
his Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs, and the first limb of
mm,
Yama, of abstinences, basically things not to do, and that's basically not harming, not lying, not
mhm,
stealing, not
mhm,
not being greedy, not being wasteful. Like these, I think this is actually spiritual practice.
mm,
Just summarized, that's it. It's actually ethics, and it's so hard, just like that's, I think I'm just really stuck on that. And so when I see something
mm,
that doesn't seem ethical or honest or that's harmful, I just can't help
mm.
but say something.
Yeah, yeah, standing for it. Like, okay, this is not okay. This doesn't align with what I want to see in the world and embody in the world. And again, to me, it's quite brave and quite, it's what I call freedom to also speak up when, even though we don't feel comfortable, or I don't really know about the US, but in France, there are many rules, and like you have to be pretty and say hello nicely and don't speak too much. And I just like, well, no, this is not who I am. And sometimes I
Mm.
just want to scream out loud. And even though it's not really politically correct, I just don't care. And yoga is also speaking up and standing for your values. And I often heard in the past that yoga doesn't have to be associated with politics. And growing up, quote unquote, I just realized like, well, we are politic, we are citizens. So actually, how could we fragment that? And isn't it's not yoga to me to create even more fragmentation? So how is that that we can perpetuate that?
Yeah, I think you can be pretty sure that whoever is saying that has a lot of privilege,
Mm,
doesn't want to take it away. I mean, it's the idea that spirituality is divorced from politics is a very privileged position to be
mm,
in. So part of it is that I have privilege because I'm basically a white man. Well, I'm Jewish, but white I'm white in this culture, and
mm,
I have a lot of power. I have a lot of access to power, more than a lot of other people I know, like people of color and um, trans people. It's like there's a lot of identities that are really, that are oppressed.
mm,
And I have a sense of it being queer, but I also feel like I get to be on both sides. And so I feel like I have a responsibility.
mm,
And so I don't think it's so brave when I'm a person who has a lot of access and safety and security. That I think it's my job to use that to support people who don't, and to speak out
mm,
when I can. And I don't all the time. I mean, I mean, it's nice for you to say I'm brave, but I feel like there's so often that I feel like um, it's easier to be quiet, and
mm,
I find myself doing that more and more, especially as I get older. I think it's easy to be quiet and just let things be, and it's disturbing. I think that's why why there's so much suffering in the world. We need to speak up when you see harm happening. That's
mm,
spiritual practice to me.
mm.
Right? That's the first teaching of ahimsa. Is like,
Yeah,
I don't cause harm, but also when I can do something to stop harm, that I do.
yeah. Mm. Yeah, I just want to say that I see you in those moments when you just feel that it's easier, and maybe it's also protecting ourselves. Like,
Yeah.
any activists out there can know that we can burn out quite easily, or any teacher or any health practitioner, and it's sometimes, yeah, sometimes it's easier to just hide underneath it and just be quiet, and we are humans, and I feel it's okay sometimes. Mm.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah. I mean,
compassion as well.
it's true because I know I have to be careful with burning out, and it's true of anyone, right?
Mm,
Especially activists. You have to be careful that you're caring for yourself. But I do think there's always more.
mm,
It's
mm,
always more detail. I know. It's interesting because the idea of self-care, which, I don't know if that term is popular in France, but in the US, self-care is like this thing that yoga and wellness kind of falls underneath this idea of self-care now. But
mm,
actually, that's an idea that came out of the civil rights movement, in particular, Black women activists like Angela Davis taught about self-care as a way of supporting people so they don't burn out, just for that reason,
mm,
like supporting activists. And so it's interesting that self-care is not these days not so much about activism, just about caring. It's more about, you know, sustaining the status quo.
Definitely.
which is not
Yeah.
what it was designed for. And I don't
Mm,
think that's what yoga was designed for. I think yoga is
mm,
a spiritual practice is designed to make us be honest and ask hard questions,
mm.
not just to hold on to power and authority.
Or profit or or
Profit.
any
Yeah,
system that, yeah.
but I think you can look throughout history and see that's what's happened. That
Mm,
all almost all the time, spirituality is used by oftentimes large religions to control people
mm,
and to have power over people.
yeah.
It's because spirituality is so powerful. They're such powerful teachings, and so they're so easily used for profit and control.
Mm,
And I think the only way to free us from that is through spirituality as well, by actually taking it back.
yeah. The full circle. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm,
to make
mm.
it about the individual.
Yeah. Through its roots, actually, and not like the profit-oriented system that it became, kind of like, I don't know if you ever participated in these kind of, and I don't know if they are in the US, but in France, they are kind of events around well-being and wellness, and you have like a little space for yourself to promote your classes or your
Yeah, like a
products, and
conference.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's often around, essential oils and like the
Mhm.
perfect product that will save your
Yeah.
health and everything. And I've been participated in that, promoting my yoga classes, and it hit me. I was like, well, I don't belong to that kind of image that Western society is built around yoga, and it's exactly what I'm fighting against. So what
Yeah.
the hell am I doing here? So it was a little bit shocking to me to again see that self-care here, and maybe as I heard in the US, it's the same. It's kind of more
Mhm.
around productivity and like take care of yourself so you can buy more, or buy that so you can be better. And I'm like, well, yoga, it's the opposite. Is getting rid of the attachments and the kind of the false sense of self, to see beyond, and that we don't need any of that. We have all inside and within. So
Yeah.
I'm always quite shocked and angry about that
Yeah,
system.
exactly. I mean, it's the
Mm,
way, again, it's a kind of colonialism
yeah.
and the way that capitalism
Mm,
uses like indigenous spiritual teaching for profit. It's power. Capitalism is powerful that way, and so you
mm,
see yoga, contemporary yoga practice is really more about capitalism than it is more about yoga. I
yeah.
mean, mostly what you see when you see yoga clothes and the
Yeah.
ads, the asana, perfected asanas and all this, and thin, most mostly young women. I mean, it's very much, it's like a distorted practice that's very
Mm,
modern. And
mm,
I mean, I don't blame any individual for that, but I think it's kind of the way that capitalism has functioned. Very much like if you look at, I hate to say this, but if you look at Catholicism through the ages and the way that religion, again, used spirituality to control people, to gain money and
mm,
power. I mean, it's very much similar to how this is now. What we're left with is a contemporary yoga scene that feels to be more about, yeah, money and power than about
mm,
spirituality. And I think it's sad, but I also feel like there is a chance here, like to try
mm,
to think, okay, what I feel is that most yoga practitioners and yoga teachers actually get it. They actually understand yoga and they feel it and they want it, but they
yeah.
don't know where to go. They
Yeah.
don't know how to take away the capitalism.
Definitely. Yeah, like I don't know if you've heard about Jo Buick. She's in Australia. She's teaching really trauma-informed yoga, and she said like I've spent my career learning to how to be white. And I was like, what does she mean? Like learning to be white? And I'm exactly like the cliche of this blonde hair, white, thin yoga teacher, and reading your book as well.
Yeah.
It shocked me again. It was so impactful. I was like, well, I'm kind of embodying the cliche, and even though I have this consciousness of the willingness to develop it, I'm that, and I can't change it. But now I can change the image that I share about, And that's something that I felt very hopeful. As you said, I selected a quote as well about the social media posts that can be a really community place where we can talk about gender and politics and race and all these questions that are so intrinsically related to yoga but are forgotten on the way. And this can be also a way, not
Yeah.
always, but so I really dove into my own Instagram profile and was like, oh, you know, that picture, maybe maybe I could do something about that. And yeah, it was hopeful for me knowing that I don't have to be ashamed of being white and blonde and seeing that that's the way I am. And but yet, if I want to embody my values, I have power over that and over the image, and then normally maybe the people that are attracted by my image. Mm,
Yeah, I mean, you have power. You have people make assumptions about you, and so you can use
mm,
that. You can use that to your advantage to speak up, And so I
yeah.
think it's, yeah, like changing the image that you share about yoga to platform other people maybe who don't fit the image. That's what I try to do. I mean, to me, accessible yoga is really about um, shifting that image of who is able to do yoga, and we do that by turning over our platform to other teachers. I mean, like that's pretty much what we do,
Mm,
and training people from marginalized or oppressed communities to become leaders and teachers in yoga. And that's at the heart of my work too. So
mm,
I think that, yeah, I don't think you should feel badly about what you have. I think it's about using it correctly,
yeah.
using all your assets, like whatever you have, any kind of connections you have, any visibility you have, any authority to raise awareness. It's just like, it's like up to white people to address racism. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's we don't need to feel guilty for being white. You just need to
Mm,
talk about racism and say that, white supremacy is influencing all the decisions we're making and all the ways we're functioning. And it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. Like people of color, in particular, Black people, are given less access, and we have to do something to change that. There has to be conscious awareness and honesty,
mm,
um, without shame. I mean, I don't think that's really helpful.
mm.
Um, you know?
It's more returning to the power we already have underneath the shame and the
Yeah.
conditioning and reclaiming that and using it, using our voice. Yeah, I think that's quite central to your work and to this just really amazing book that I'm so proud to have with me, Yoga Revolution, building a practice of courage and compassion. You see, courage, yeah, bravery, courage. It's so yeah, rooted in your work. And I'm very glad that you're offering that to the world and like another orientation around yoga, that it's possible as well. At least it showed me that it was possible. As I said at the very beginning, okay, you realize that it's not the way you want to teach or post on social media, but then how do we do that? And that's also why you're offering a teacher training as well. So I would be honored for you to share about that too.
Yeah. Can I just talk about courage though for a minute?
For
Because
sure.
in English, I mean, first of all, your English is incredible. I
Thank
can't believe
you.
your French. I mean, it's just amazing. Better than mine, I think. But I was just thinking about the difference for me between courage and bravery. And
Mm,
I mean, it's semantics, but I would just say that I think there's something about courage that comes from it's French, Latin, cœur, like heart, right? So
yeah.
it's like having heart, and
Mm,
being courageous to me is that spiritual practice of like being able to expose my heart and to allow my own suffering to exist, like to be really honest that
mm,
I'm suffering. And then because I'm being honest with myself, I can see it in other people.
mm,
And then when I see suffering, I have to do something about it. I do something, I speak up. That's courage, courage to
yeah.
expose yourself and then to see others. Bravery to me feels a little different. I don't know if it feels more just like I'm brave, I did this thing. But
Mm,
there's something to me about courageous that feels like it's the heart of spirituality. And I think this is the piece that's lacking in most
yeah.
spiritual teachings. I don't see a lot of conversation around courage to address systemic harm.
Mm,
and to be honest about our own suffering. And it's not, it's both things. That's what I say in the book, right? It's an inner revolution
Mm.
because it's being honest with yourself, and it's externally a revolution because it's about seeing clearly what's actually happening in the world and changing the way we live out in the world.
Mm.
But you're asking about teacher training. I mean, I've been running a continuing education program for yoga teachers for a long time, accessible yoga teacher training, which is like a 38-hour shorter course that helps yoga teachers have some skill around making their teaching accessible, and then exposing them to like what are the obstacles to accessibility. And we look at things like racism and ableism and cultural appropriation, but I also focus a lot on the skills for teaching asana, which is what I think people mostly are coming for. But then now I'm going back to something I used to do, which is that I used to train yoga teachers 200-hour level basic training, and I'm starting that online. First time online coming up soon. And I'm excited about that because I think online teaching is just more accessible. People join me from all over the world. It's less expensive. You can fit into your schedule. You don't have to travel. You don't have, you know what I mean? You can, almost anyone can join. And and it's financially accessible. We make scholarships for anyone. So I love teaching online, and I love 200-hour trainings. It's a long commitment though, but I feel like it's exciting to start your foundational training with this idea of accessibility and equity as the foundational teaching that you're starting with, rather than just adding it on, later.
Yeah, that's quite rare, actually. I've never heard about that. Well, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I just never heard myself about that, and that was just so helpful again and eye-opening to know that we can build an entire teacher training around the ethics, which are yoga, aren't they? But
Yeah.
well,
That's actually how accessible yoga, the name accessible yoga, started, is like around 20. I mean, I've been teaching for a long time, but then, I've been teaching since 1995. But then in 2007, maybe, I had many students. At that time, I was leading 200-hour trainings in person, and I was teaching yoga for people with disabilities in the community. And a lot of my disabled students had been longtime practitioners at that point, and I thought they'd make excellent teachers, but they didn't feel like they could go and take the 200-hour training. It wasn't accessible for them. It was too fast. It was too intense. It wasn't physically, the practices weren't physically accessible. And so one of my students came to me, and we were talking, and I just said, you really need to take teacher training. And she said, I can't go to that month-long intensive program, whatever. And so I thought, oh, I'll make an accessible yoga training for you. And this is how the idea of accessible yoga even started, with a 200-hour training originally. And then, eventually accessible yoga became, now it's bigger than me, but it's also like an organization. It's two organizations, really. We have a nonprofit, Accessible Yoga Association, where we have ambassadors, and we have an online studio, which is brand new.
Opened recently, right?
Yeah, it just opened. It's very exciting. I just taught there this morning. I teach live classes there right now. An ambassador program for yoga teachers who want to support us, and we give them training and connections. And then there's the Accessible Yoga School, where I run my trainings, which is connected but separate organization. And of course, accessible yoga, the concept, really got out there through the conferences. We had these in-person conferences starting in 2015 that brought everyone together. It was beautiful. It was like a family reunion.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
Because there are people doing this way longer than me. I mean, there's people who've been teaching accessibly for a very long time, and just incredible teachers and pioneers who are out on their own doing it. And I'm just good at community organizing. I'm good at bringing people together. So this is my skill. And so I brought people together now for the conferences, and now for these organizations. It's just nice to have that community, It's important in yoga.
Definitely. That's exactly what I wanted to ask, which is kind of a selfish question in a way. I wanted to ask you, because in the book, for example, you feature a lot of teachers that are part of your community and share the same ethics as well. And that was actually really inspiring for me to discover all their journeys and their point of views, simply. So that was great. And also I realized that in my area in France, first of all, and still in my little world space and yoga world, I don't fit in. I don't feel to relate to anybody really, and I quite feel quite alone, and that's why also I'm just so thankful for the technology and access to technology to talk to you, for example. Today I just feel less alone, and to have social media, and it's nurturing me, so I'm thankful for
Yeah.
that. But yet in my daily
Yeah.
life, I don't share the same vision about yoga. I'm really into body mind centering as well. I don't know if you heard about that, somatic
Mhm.
practices and free movement, and now more accessible yoga and share yoga and everything. So I'm quite alone, honestly, and a part of me is really okay with that. But in another one, I'm like, well, I would love to be sharing about somatics and trauma-informed yoga care or trauma-informed care in general, and I don't find a tribe really. So I
Mhm.
was curious about, maybe in the US it's more generalized, but do you have any
Hmm.
advice for people like me?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think we're mostly like you. That's
Yeah.
why I started the conferences and which became
Mm,
the nonprofit because I felt
mm,
alone. I
okay.
had moved from I was living in the Bay Area of San Francisco and I moved to Southern California 10 years ago and I felt very isolated
Mm,
and I started I mean the truth is I started to feel envious of the one teacher I knew in town here. She
yeah.
was teaching yoga for cancer. She's my friend. And I was jealous of her teaching yoga for cancer, which seems so horrible because she's doing beautiful work, but I'm jealous of that because just she
Mm,
had this amazing success. And I thought, wow. And so then I really sat with it for a long time. And I don't know if you're familiar with the teaching of Pratipaksha Bhavana. I talk about that one in my book, but it's
yeah.
this from the Yoga Sutras, it's the idea of replacing negative thoughts with opposite thoughts
Mm,
or reflecting on the outcome of negative thinking, of understanding that negative thinking will cause you pain. Like if you go down the rabbit hole, we call it, that eventually you will be the one who suffers. And so I realize I'm being jealous of her and I realized what could I change? Like how could I shift that?
mm,
Um, and I had this image come to me in meditation of my friend, this teacher, standing on a stage at
mm,
a conference. And so that's what made me think
mm,
of doing an accessible yoga conference. And I was thinking, the people that are doing this work need to be supported and platformed, and we need to come together. I need a community like you, like I needed that. So that's why we created this community. But now
mm,
that we're all online, I think it's actually better. Like you said, I
mm,
think technology is key. I have some people locally that do this, but my community is all over the world. Like I feel connected to yoga teachers literally everywhere. I mean, it's
mm,
incredible. We have hundreds and hundreds of ambassadors around the world. I hope you'll become an ambassador, an accessible yoga ambassador. You just become a member of our nonprofit and which supports our mission to share these teachings more widely. We're also on Facebook, which is great because that's totally free. And we have
mm.
called the Accessible Yoga Community on Facebook with over 12,000 people
Well,
around the world. And then we do an annual conference, which is a great time to come and
mm,
meet and chat. And the conference is really about connecting. It's not so much
mm,
learning. I mean, there's a little learning, but it's more about like meeting others.
yeah.
And I know there's other people in France,
Mm.
actually. I already
Yeah.
know one actually in my
Oh,
mind. I'll
give
tell
them,
you.
give me their contact.
Yeah, I will connect you later because I have
Mm,
France. I mean, I used to teach in Europe a lot, and there's lots of amazing European accessible yoga teachers. In fact, one of my great friends, Uma Kokki, she's Italian, and she still leads my training in Italian. She leads
mm,
accessible yoga training in Italian
beautiful.
online these days, but
Hmm.
she's built an incredible community there in Italy,
Mm.
and we have
Well,
teachers all
if you
over.
need any French translator, know that I'm here.
Yes,
Yeah. Mm,
but I think it's about finding them
mm,
all over. It's
mm,
nice in a way to think about it to
mm,
me that it's not that they're just here, they're actually everywhere. It's
like a
It's
web,
beautiful.
like
Yeah,
yeah, without limit. Like yeah,
yeah,
and it's more about ethics to meet them through the connection and the ethics and the values that you share, and not only because you live in the same area. It's really from heart to heart. That's even deeper to me. Mm,
yeah,
mm,
yeah. It's beautiful,
mm,
and I find the other thing is that almost every yoga teacher I know shares that. To be honest,
mm,
I don't. It's not like I mean, the accessible yoga community is people who are very, very committed to this work, and so I am so grateful for them. But I have to say that I feel connected to the larger yoga community. I no
mm,
longer want to separate myself because I feel like we're all in this together. Like I don't. We may not agree on the details, right? But I think in
mm,
the end we share the same love and passion for the teachings.
mm,
Like on Instagram, I don't know, last few months I've been remixing reels that are very physically intense, right? But the experience has not been what I expected, which is
mm,
that almost every time the person who I reach out to them and I talk to them about remixing their reel, and they're so open and excited and share a love of yoga and wanting to make it accessible. I mean,
mm,
I've never had a negative reaction to doing that. It's been remarkable. And again, it shows me that I have created these separation in my mind. I
mm,
think it's maybe just that they don't know, they don't know it, right? That's just not what they're focused on. They're
mm.
focused on something else. And so I feel like I want to help. I want to help teach them and connect to them. Um, at least that's my mission, right? Is to not turn away from anyone.
Mm. I just feel like a warm hug, like even for my own sense of separation as well, and like feeling. I think it was from you at least. I think that I heard we always need an enemy so that we can feel ourselves that we are in the good direction, and I can 100% relate to that, and I can see that I built this whole thing like the yoga industry is bad and I'm good, like Elisa, I'm doing good, and it just fuels me, and I'm thankful for that, and yet it also
It's not
fuels me
true.
with negativity. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it's just
well,
not true. It's not
yeah. So I'm
exactly. I
glad you bring
think
that up.
one of the beautiful teachings in yoga is that, in fact, it's interesting. This is a teaching around asana. According to
Mm,
Patanjali, he says that through the practice of asana, we can move beyond duality.
mm,
And that always confused me,
mm.
But duality is this physical world, right? The natural world of like
Yeah,
hot and cold and good and bad and all that, like that.
yeah.
And so it's interesting that that's the kind of benefit or
Mm.
promise of
Of yoga too.
of yoga, of
Mm,
asana in particular, though, for some
mm,
reason, of the way we move our body and the way we
yeah.
connect with our body, is that it's like maybe through the body we see the way the natural world works or something,
Mm,
and we realize that we're more than that. I don't know,
mm,
um but yeah,
yeah.
going beyond that good and bad and just trying
Mm,
to understand that they're also on their way, they're on their path,
mm,
and I'm on my path, and we both make mistakes.
sure. Mm,
Um, and that there's mostly, I mean, I've had just incredible reactions. In fact, last week, was it last week? I remixed a reel from, I didn't know this person. I just reached out to them, and I liked the reel they made. It was a very intense flow, right, that they're doing.
mm,
And, and then the next one, she did a chair yoga flow
mm,
on her
yeah.
reel. Like she has hundreds of thousands of followers, and she did a whole flow
Beautiful.
of chair yoga and thanked me just to make her think about it. And I was like, oh wow, that's amazing.
That's
Because all of her followers
contributing.
then are exposed to that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Instead of being against, we're like, let's go together and let's learn from each other and let's co-build this world that we wish to see and to embody. And that's beautiful. Yeah, I can feel a lot of enthusiasm and tingling sensation. I'm like, yeah, it's so possible and yeah, it's so expanding for me. Yeah. Mm,
Right. Accessibility is about increasing access not only
mm,
to more people,
yeah.
but also to like exposing the heart of the teaching, which I think everybody wants. We
Mm,
all, I mean, that's the other thing I'd say is like, is if yoga really is like a universal right? These are universal concepts. That means that they should apply to everyone. So we all need access to them, including the people that can do that
Yeah.
gymnastic stuff, and those of us that can't, we all need it. But I don't mean to be positive about it. There's a lot of harm caused.
Mm.
But at the same time, I think I can right now, I haven't called people out many times, but I like personally what it is. The individuals I love, it's the systems that are bad
Yeah.
and are dangerous. And so
Mm.
it's in a way the structure needs to be addressed. Some of these big organizations need to be called out.
Mm.
You know, the abusive teachers need to be called out. But the individual students, the participants, the yoga teachers, 99% of them are just on their way, doing the best they can, just like me
Mm.
and you.
Yeah, definitely just finding strategies and ways to feed needs. Actually, we all have the same needs, and we just find different different journeys sometimes. And how do we bring people together and this integration either inside of ourselves and instead of the fragmentation and the dissociation, really like finding union, finding yoga inside of
Yeah,
ourselves,
exactly.
and then we can project that out there through the summits or the conferences or just being embodying yoga. That's why I called that podcast Being Yoga instead of Doing Yoga. It's essential that it's part of how we perceive the world. And I've heard that, I think it was Scott Lyons, he ran the Embody Lab as well, which is just amazing as well. And he said we are met and meeting. How do we meet and how are we met? And
Mm.
this kind of relational permanent dynamics is, to me, is yoga, and that's
Mm.
something that I really find in your work as well and in your words today. So makes sense totally.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
beautiful.
Mm.
I think the key to it for me is in the teachings themselves. And I go back to the
Mm.
sutras for this because the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are a dualistic philosophy, which
Mm.
I find much easier for my mind to understand
Yeah.
than non-dualism. So when there's dualism, that means there's two. And what Patanjali says is there's nature, prakriti, and there's spirit, purusha.
Mm.
And and most of the teachings that he shares are, including the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs, come from what he says is the importance of clear vision of what he calls viveka, right?
Mm.
Discriminative discernment of being able to see what is spirit
Mm.
and quote real, like what is the true part of you that's unchanging
Mm.
and immortal and eternal, and then what is the part of you and the world that is changing, that
Mm.
is nature,
Mm.
that's constantly changing, birth and death, and I think that's the key for me in terms of other people is first seeing that in myself, but also seeing that in other people around me. It's like our human experience is so different. There's so much diversity, and like your experience of life is totally different than mine. And for a person of color or for a trans person, an immigrant, like they're gonna have a completely different lived experience than me. But that's the prakriti. But on the purusha level, we're the same.
Yeah. Mm.
But both of those things are true.
Yeah.
And I think we have a hard time. I don't know, myself, it's hard to hold these at the same
Mm.
time.
Yeah. The paradox, like the great
Yeah,
paradox.
the
Yeah.
great paradox that we're the same and we're different.
Mm. Yeah. Mm-mm.
No.
Yeah.
But I think that's at the heart of yoga, actually. And it's changed my life. That the realization that both are true, that we are the same and we have completely different experiences.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. When I hear you, it reminds me of how wide I saw the world when I discovered that as well. I was like, oh wow, it's not only what I see or what I thought was true, it's also like both and not or it's so more inclusive, and that's something that I also discovered in trauma therapy, for example, like this dual awareness, like you can be
Mm.
this and that because you're neither. You know, like you are both and also you're none of them, you're just experiencing that. I'm like, well, at the beginning I felt quite lost, like, well, but who am I? And well, that's yoga, right? So
Who am
it's
I? I mean, but that's one of my favorite parts of yoga. There's It's
mm,
called jnana yoga, the yoga of self-inquiry, the yoga of wisdom,
mm,
of who am I, asking that question. the Jnani yogi is that exactly that, the person that can hold that, the two things. Like one of my, I think it's, I don't know if this, who taught me this, but to be able to look at a table, you can look at a wooden table and see table, but also see tree.
Beautiful. Yeah, the continuum. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's a tree, but it's actually a table. It's
Yeah.
both. And it's like, that's human, right?
Mm.
We're spirit and we're also human,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
I'm Jivana, but I'm also spirit. It's both things at the same time. And it's hard to hold.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard to hold.
It's like it's you, me, and we. And the three of them are right as well. So it's a little bit confusing at first, I guess, or maybe forever. But it's also for me, I like to see it as a game, kind of like an explorative game, and not to when I feel quite lost or
Yeah.
when I discovered your work, for example, I felt like shocked and I was like, well, let's savor that. Let's savor that experience and remind yourself that you are witnessing that. And it's not comfortable, that's for sure. Honestly, it's not always comfortable. And yet, what can you learn and how can you grow and expand from that? And what can you embody from that? So it's
Yeah, one of the things
fascinating.
I teach, I teach sometimes people who get confused by what I'm saying. I
Mm,
ask people to think about what's changed over the course of their lives and what
mm,
hasn't changed. So,
mm,
like, if you think back to your earliest memories, this is
mm,
probably in my book. If you think back to like your earliest childhood memory, and then maybe when you were like a teenager, and then like a little bit younger than you are now, and then now, it's like what was the same and what was different?
mm,
And I think it's important because I think as a very young child, even your mind isn't quite the same, right?
mm,
It's not even that the ego is quite there yet, but there's a sense of self, a consciousness, an awareness that's there
mm,
in you that doesn't change. But the
definitely.
bodies and the mind are both part of nature, prakriti, and they're always changing.
Mm, mm. Yeah, beautiful. That's also that reminds me of somatics as well, and like the nonverbal
Ah,
therapies. Like we don't have access to words, maybe for the 2 or 3 sometimes first years of our life. So how can we explore all our scars through words? And sometimes it's so healing to come back to movement and to sensations, and that's our primal language, really. So I highly value that too. Mm,
really?
mm,
Yeah. It's like it's not denying them. They're both important. The
yeah.
physical body. That's what's so beautiful about yoga too, is that it
Yeah.
is this embodied spiritual practice. When
Mm,
most spiritual practices are much more intellectual,
mm,
yoga is so physical. I mean, the asanas,
brilliant.
brilliant.
Yeah.
Um, but more than asana, it's working with all levels of being
Yeah.
and the physical body, that pranic, mostly the energy body,
Mm,
pranic body, and the breath
yeah.
to eventually get to the mind. I mean, yoga is really about working with the mind,
Mm, mm,
but using all the tools you have, to
mm.
get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so integrative. Like there's nothing to push aside or to hide or to be ashamed of. It's like, well, let's see all of it, all of us, all the nuances and the colors and like the rainbow as well. And it's just it's yoga. So let's explore that. Mm,
Yeah, that's what I said in my book. I
yeah.
almost called the book Rainbow Mind, because I love that image of that. Um, I have one on my window, a prism, a prism that makes a rainbow,
Oh
and how,
yeah. Yeah, like the kaleidoscopic shapes that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it because I think it expresses this idea of like the white light makes all the rainbows of color. It's both are the same, but one you see the rainbow, one you just see white
Yeah.
or light.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we are. It's like
Definitely.
we have to find that connection. Um, my teacher's teacher used to say, unity and diversity is yoga.
Mm,
Finding the connection with others, but also appreciating the difference.
mm.
Anyway, I think we got that point. So
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And like this idea of we are multiple, and that's a fact. And now let's
mhm.
savor that. Let's see where it leads us. Really. Beautiful.
Mm. Yeah, where does it lead us?
Good question.
Actually, well, I'll answer that one too. I'll just say that I think if the point of it is, mostly we think of ourselves as separate. Like the reason we're going on and on about this, I think you and I both, about this main one point, is that it's so important because we think of ourselves as separate beings, or we tend to leap to this like universal spiritual teaching that's very like we're all one. But actually, if we can see that we're a separate person and like and we're connected at the same time, then it makes me care about you and it makes me want to serve you because I care about you and love you. And I think that's what yoga is really about. Yoga is about connecting with the truth inside of myself and then acting in a way that is respectful of that connection that we share. And that's service.
Mm.
Karma yoga. Karma yoga is an essential aspect of these teachings that is lost today. Because it's moving, acting out of love, out of consciousness of the connection that we share. And it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do
It
because
is.
the separation is easier to see.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not even going to pretend that it's easy. Like, it
No.
is hard. And it's a lifelong journey, I guess. And that's the
Yeah.
beauty of yoga as well. It can come with you. It is part of you whenever you explore that and whenever you kind of open the door for yoga to enter into your life. It's always there. It's always present. It's resourced inside you. So whenever you need.
Yeah. And our relationships help us. So if there is someone you love,
Mm.
caring for them, making them a nice meal or saying something kind,
Mm.
that's an act of service because it's not for you. It's not about what you'll get out of it. It's about purely acting because you love something or someone. It's a
Mm.
beautiful thing.
Mm.
And to me, that's the fullest form of yoga practice.
Love
And
in
yeah,
action.
the most, yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we could go on for like hours. I really have to
Yeah.
come to the US for sure. But I
Yeah.
also want to
Come.
be respectful of your time, and we've hit the 1 hour time limit. And I was wondering if there is anything else that you want to share, even though you shared a lot of wisdoms already.
Gosh, I know. I feel like we just started. I don't know. I mean, there's
Yeah,
so much to
that's the
say.
problem.
I think I would just say, that kind of repeating what I said earlier, that first we care for ourselves and learn about ourselves through practice. And that's what I do. My practice is dedicated to uncovering the truth within me. And the more I can do that, the more I can see it outside of me. And then I can act in a way that is aligned with that vision. So I think, I don't know, I just feel grateful to anyone who is practicing yoga and other forms of conscious spirituality. I really hope that whoever's listening will just continue their journey of self-exploration and allow it to continue to expand their heart. And I'm very grateful to you for your openness and your kindness. I mean, I'm so touched that you enjoy my books. It means a lot to me. It really does. And I hope you'll stay connected with us and become an ambassador for accessible yoga. It's a membership program. Anyone can join. And so,
Mm.
but I especially extend an invitation to you. So please.
That sounds so exciting. I'm like, yeah, that's right. I feel that it's open. Yeah, thank you so very much. I just, remind me of that quote of Gandhi that just everything started from there for me in the yoga world. It just embodied the change you wish to see in the world, and to me, you are embodying that change that I wish to see in the world. So I'm really considering you as a mentor and as kind of a guide ahead, and that's why I just really enjoyed your book, and I'm so
Thank you.
honored to have access to this screen that we can share together, and I'm thankful for everyone listening to receive what you shared with us today. Just very meaningful. So thank you. Thank you again. And I
Thank
will
you.
make sure
Thanks.
to share all the links for sure so that
Uh,
everyone can explore your website and the organization as well, for sure. Mm.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And thank you for everyone listening or watching or YouTube as well. And see you very soon for the next one.